Welcome to a first look at Behat testing in Drupal. My name is aczietlow. I'm from Mindground. Made the quick jaunt up from Baltimore. Lesson learned. We'll carpool next time. Yeah. There's some code samples in here. Don't worry too much about it. I'll post the slides on in Twitter. They're actually in Reveal.js, so they're in GitHub. If you want the code, if you want the slides and the code samples, you can clone the GitHub repo. If you find a spelling error or something wrong, feel free to open a merge request. Very open to that. I had someone actually open a pull request after I gave a talk once because of the misspelling. Open it. Welcome it with open arms. So, by a quick show of hands, how many in here are developers, site builders, project managers, clients?
I'm all of those.
Okay, awesome. This talk's really aimed at both of the audiences. And understanding how to approach testing, understanding what the benefits are, why we should spend time with it, what the importance, what the wins are for all groups involved. And the reason I talk about this is I find that when deadlines come creeping up or we get a little bit behind on projects, it seems like testing is one of the first things that gets slashed. It was just a nice to have, it wasn't something important in the first place, so let's cut that out of the budget so we can spend more time building features and delivering value to the client. So I want to look at why we even bother testing in the first place, like any and all tests that you could think to throw at a Drupal project. It's going to lead to better code quality. If you're testing, you're ensuring quality assurance, you're going to be delivering better features, better product, cleaner code. But I wanted to really hit on that concept of we need to cut testing because we don't have time, or testing's hard. We don't have the time to spin up testing in the first place. We don't have the budget, we don't have the room. Sales really went hard on this project. We don't have the time or space for it. But if you spend time investing, you spend time understanding what your code base is to begin with, you're going to have less regression moving forward from a developer standpoint. That means you're going to spend less time sprint by sprint, or on some longer projects, I've had the experience of maybe after 3 to 4 months of full active development, sometimes we have to devote an entire sprint to go back and deal with all of the bugs we've had lingering up or cropping out that we've kind of just pushed to the side because they weren't directly blockers and we needed to meet some kind of epic deadline. So I wanted to talk about focusing on testing means we'll spend less time dealing with regression bugs. We'll have better acceptance criteria, so we'll understand what both our code does as well as the client's business needs. So it means not only are we delivering better quality code, very quality components, but the components we deliver are also more closely aligned with what the client's actual business goals are. And then, especially for longer projects from a developer perspective, the more that your entire team has a greater understanding of the code base you're leveraging, in Drupal, the custom code that you've written, what corner of the Drupal ecosystem you have siloed yourself into. Maybe your project early on, a project lead decided your project was going to leverage organic groups very heavily. Through testing organic groups, your entire team will garner a better understanding of what organic groups is, how they interact with your custom components, how they interact with Drupal. All of these aspects of less regression, better understanding of the code base, you're going to lead into much faster development. So that's kind of the perspective from me as a developer, me as a team lead that has a team of developers. We obviously want to test. I don't want to have regression bugs. I don't want to have integration bugs or a new feature request that breaks previously committed code. But from the other side of the table, let's talk about why the client should care. These could be, if it's an internal project or you're on a product team, this could be a stakeholder inside the company. This could be a stakeholder on a client team. Whoever is responsible, or whoever directly is responsible for the business benefit of the site is kind of who the client is. This could be a nonprofit. This could be like an e-commerce store, but you're going to have better product quality. And again, back to that less regression, we're going to have less time we have to spend and double back to go back and deal with bugs of things that we thought and our developer told us were done. We agreed we're done, and we have to come back 2 or 3 weeks later, 2 or 3 months later, and spend time working again on something that was delivered to us that we thought we were done, we passed on, and we've now got business rules that are relying on this. Again, better acceptance criteria, and there's that key concept again of faster development, which is kind of this, it almost comes off as a misconception to the client of, I understand you have a lot of ambitions and a lot of features you want us to accomplish. Let us take time away from that and invest time in testing what it is we're trying to build. I think what I find a lot of times is clients, to meet their business goals, kind of play feature dartboard. Darts with their features of, we've got this business goals, we think we understand how we're going to accomplish that, so maybe, I don't really understand the web, that's why we have the vendor, but the vendor doesn't understand our business requirements, so to bridge that gap, let's have them build all of the possible things ever, and eventually we'll throw something and it'll stick to the dartboard and it'll be on target. So we have this push to develop as many features as possible. There's sometimes inherent distrust between the stakeholders and developers that they don't really have a good understanding of our business goals. By spending time up front to develop these acceptance criteria and to build out tests around those acceptance criteria, we're actually going to spend more time developing features that help you accomplish your business goals, which is instinctively different from just helping you develop more features. Sometimes it's a collaborative process that needs to happen to ensure that whatever it is that we're spending time building out is actually going to help you accomplish whatever it is your business goals. So it's a good idea, obviously, as the title of the presentation would suggest. But why isn't everybody doing this? And I see a lot of, we'll boil down to excuses of testing takes time. It's investment away from delivering more features, building our product out, and putting things in front of the end users of our site. It's not really there's no tangible value to it. There's some really interesting case studies that have been done specifically around at Amazon and Microsoft have published some of these studies. And they did a comparison of their internal teams with what they were working on, teams that were in and owned a test-driven development mentality versus team that followed the traditional waterfall approach of, we've got our requirements, it'll take this long, and we'll do testing at the end as kind of an afterthought. And what they found was they had a tremendous number, a tangible, quantifiable number of reduction in regression bugs that were introduced. And this, at the end of the time, at the end of the project lifestyle, meant you had 15 to 30% additional development time you spent building out features that put value in front of your end users, which is huge. I think I appreciate these studies, and while nothing quantifiable, I have a lot of anecdotal evidence that on projects that really embrace the test-driven development mentality, we seem to spend a lot more time focused on delivering value and building out things of value to the client. But this is great. This opens up a conversation with management and sales, so important sales, to make sure that they're helping educate our clients on the value of giving us this extra time, letting us spend these resources on testing. Another thing I hear a lot is writing good tests. Writing good tests are hard. Writing good tests is really hard. It's true. It is. I could, on the most mundane feature, I could spend forever being as pedantic as I possibly could. I could refactor the language. I could refactor how it runs and try to make it as much of an isolated unit as possible. But at the end of the day, some tests are better than no test. Anytime you can have a test in place that will catch any kind of regression bug, that's more time that you'll spend actually developing features. So how to accomplish this in the Drupal space? Drupal, especially with 8, has grown up a lot, gone to the days of mostly gone to the days of simple test. Simple test is still around. We primarily are going to be talking about Behat. We leveraged it. It's very prominent. It's very easy to leverage in Drupal 7. It's very easy to leverage in Drupal 8. Drupal 8 also has the availability of being able to actually unit test portions of it, which is another amazing testing tool. We won't be covering so much of that, of anything PHP unit or phpspec related. So I talked about TDD, or test-driven development. Behavior-driven development, or BDD, is this concept of, instead of just building out a feature and saying, okay, well, my request was to install this module, install the workbench module, and make sure things could be revisioned. It's about understanding, every time we deliver a feature, how that affects the software and how the human user interacts with it. And we define those in behaviors, how humans interact on a behavioral level with the software you're writing. And then we codify that down into tests. So in Drupal with Behat's case, there's a module for that, kind of. There is an open source project for that. It's called the Drupal Extension, which is available, if you're in Drupal 8, very easily available via Composer. If you're in Drupal 7, you can also still pull it in with Composer, or you can download it. Behat as itself is an open source tool in PHP that is composed of several libraries that allow us to take these behavioral tests that are described in a human readable language, codify that, and make that executable. Drupal Extension takes that concept and opens it up to Drupal a little bit more, some of the more Drupal-y things that we have, like how to create a node. That's kind of a specific thing to Drupal. The open web testing frameworks don't have that concept, but Drupal Extension will add that concept for us. As far as setting this up with Drupal, it's not very hard. Add it to your Composer file, as I mentioned before, or you can just install it. I think they have some precompiled sources you can download. And then you need a YAML file. It's a configuration file. If you're in Drupal 8, this is very familiar to you already. If you're in Drupal 7, think of an info file with a slightly different structure. It's not complicated to get it running out of the box. You very quickly can make it very complicated depending what your needs are and how to suit them. Not really worth covering much in a presentation. It will change through the next couple of releases as they mark features as depreciated and add new features to it. Very easy just to Google what the baseline Behat YAML is, and it's a great starting point. So, talked about tests conceptually and getting this magical Behat tool rigged up with Drupal. Let's kind of look at what that looks like. And here's this is a sample repository of my Drupal site that I could have. www is just my web root. That's where I'm serving Drupal out of. If you're with Pantheon or I think Acquia, you might have it in a folder called doc root. But I've got my Composer file. I've run Composer install, so it's added a vendor directory there. That's where all of my magic Behat things live. And then, unfortunately in Drupal, at least with Drupal 7, please don't use features like you use features in Drupal 8. But there's a bit of a namespace conflict. Behat's all about defining behaviors to the features of your site. So when you break up and organize your Behat test, Behat wants to refer to those as features. That's more in the software features, not the Drupal 7 config tool features. But by default, it will look for a folder in your project root called features. And you more or less need two things. All of your tests will end with a .features extension. And then there's some magic code you can write. We'll cover that in a little bit in a few slides forward. Feature context is just the PHP code where we take all this human readable code and tell it how to interact and actually do things. And of course, there's the Behat YAML, and of course, a README. Every project should have a README. Please don't make me guess on how I'm supposed to interact with your project. So I wanted to kind of walk through a fictitious example of taking a client requirement and turning that into acceptance criteria. I've got I've got a client that has a magazine publishing site. It has a bunch of articles, and for the time being, all we've done is ingest the articles, put them up on the static site, and let them use it. They now want a requirement, they want to edit the articles on the site as a user. Well, we don't want anybody to, so we're going to put a user login mechanism in front of that. I'm not going to test just a user login mechanism. This might be a request that comes in with the clients. I want to be able to log into my site so I can edit my content. And that's great. If we had stopped short at just, I want to log into my site, that's not really a great behavior to understand or test for. We can build that, and there's tons of ways we can implement that and build that, but we really need to understand the why. Understand why it is we're building this feature, what value it's adding to your users, your end users, your editor users, whomever. We need to understand what value it adds and how we're implementing to achieve that value. So all in all, this is a good requirement. We would take that and break it up into kind of an example of how we would walk through that on a Drupal site. Well, if I'm not logged in, so I'm an anonymous user, I want to be able to log into my website through somehow. And I only want to be able to log in so I can edit my content. I shouldn't be able to edit content if I'm not logged in. I should be able to edit content if I am logged in. So I would take the requirement that came in, spit down an example of, this is more or less, this is what I understand what you're asking, run that by the client, run that by, if it's, we don't necessarily need direct client feedback. Sometimes we put product owners on our internal teams to verify that this is what I understand the business requirements are, this is how I want to reach that. Can you confirm this is what you want? It's kind of spitting back what the requirement is to make sure that we're going to build something that's useful. We're not building a feature that doesn't mean what they need, and we're, again, building a feature to deliver that value to them. So I would break that acceptance criteria defined down into more finite, more granular steps that I could walk a user through or walk a process through in Drupal. And this is we're just assuming the base feature here. So I'd walk through an example of given I'm an anonymous user, when I'm on the user login page, which is the default login page, and I fill in name with admin, and I fill in pass with admin, and I press login, then I should see the link log out. Fun little aside, this is how Drupal 7 tested to see if you were logged in. There wasn't any grand magic method to see if, in the simple test suite to see if you were logged in, would log you in, make sure there was a logout link. So this kind of articulates what the login process is. It's in a human readable language, so the clients, our PO, the PMs, everybody in the team can understand exactly what it is we're talking about and can very likely walk through this process on the site. It describes how a human, what the human behavior is to go from an anonymous user to logged in. We had a second part of the requirement that was I need to be able to edit content. I don't just need to log in and be able to log in and log out. I need to be able to edit content. So we'll add on to that, given I'm logged in as a user and we're all familiar with roles in Drupal, and I have an administrative role, when I go to node add page, so I can go to the Drupal's node edit or node add page, then I should see create basic page, which is the big header you see when you're on the node add page. Also, I should get a 200 response, meaning that Drupal's checked, there wasn't a permission error, there wasn't a server error. So I didn't get an access denied. I didn't get a big header message telling me I'm not allowed to be there. I'm seeing the correct header that I'm expecting, and I got the right HTTP response. So we've taken the client requirement and broken it down in step-by-step format in very human-readable language. All in all, there's some very minor structural things that we would stick all this together. Again, just stick this test more or less as we've written it, and this is something that could that would go in a ticket as acceptance criteria. And our QA could manually walk through this. Our client could understand what it is we're trying to implement, how we're implementing it, how it'll work. We'd add some structural components there of where I put this this is called a tag in Behat. I would just stick this at the top of the file. This is just telling our testing software that we want this test to run on Drupal. This will load in all of our Drupal things, so it understands what I mean when I say given I'm logged in as a user with a role. And then I go through and this up here is more or less just context for any testers or anybody running the test. This describes what the feature is. It's always, again, important to keep in mind why we're building this feature and what its overall purpose is designed to do. So anything we add to the login feature, whether it's OAuth or single sign-on or anything of that nature, we want to make sure that everything is driving back to our original business goals of I want to be able to log in and edit my content. We've broken this up into two separate scenarios. Just one, I go from not logged in to logged in, and two, I verify that I can get all the way through that process, and then two, I kind of abbreviate that down into one line and say when I go from not logged in to logged in, I should be able to add new content. The neat thing about this is this isn't just like a test or this isn't just words we put in a ticket. This is an executable test, which I don't know if it shows up well there. Let's see if I have horrible color scheme in my terminal. But as is, we would drop that in. That test would execute. Black on black. Black text on black background was an excellent choice.
Excellent.
Should work on the accessibility of my testing out, but we can see here, this is something we stick in our code base, and everything we build moving out past this point, we can run this test again, and we can know with confidence this is done. We said it was done. It does exactly what we said it would do. It's implemented exactly how we said it would be implemented, and nothing that's introduced now or any point in the future will change this without us knowing. And hopefully, if something was introduced that did change that, you would then go back and adjust this to make sure that this test was still accurate. This helps build a lot of trust as projects go forward. It's really kind of counterproductive to build a feature and at any point in the future have that feature come back as buggy again. When you tell the client that it's done, you have the spec for it, it's done, and it works how it was intended, you really need to be making sure that you're not having to go back on that very often or at all. So here's just a different example, which I probably should have updated. Full disclosure, I gave this talk in Orlando 2 years ago. But hypothetically, say we've got a Drupal event site, and we want to make sure that we can add new events, and when we add new events, they get properly listed to the calendar. We'd go through and just describe this as a non-user. I want to view dates related to an event so that I can decide if it's something I'd like to attend. Pretty common use case on most Drupal campsites. So we're making sure that kind of the main overarching purpose of our site is being accomplished. Given I'm an honest user, and I go to given an honest user and an event term with the term camp exists, and an event. So again, this is kind of the Drupal extension language we get. I'm adding taxonomy terms on the fly. I'm adding two taxonomy terms, one for Drupal camp, one for Drupal, one for camp. Then I create a node, event content, and very similar to the Drupal structure, I just created a node with field. That's represented in that kind of table view. Title is for Drupal camp. It's in Orlando. It's a great camp. If you get the chance, highly recommend. So I've created the node, I've created the taxonomy terms. I would expect if content like that exists on my site, when I go to the content, and in this case, I'm also assuming that I have path auto installed. So if I go to content based on the path auto settings, I should see the main title text, I should see the tags it was tagged with, I should see the date it was tagged with, and I should see the text just describing the event a little bit. This is an important concept I wanted to just touch on that I've gone back and forth with on kind of our QA department a couple times. You should always assume statelessness as much as possible when testing. They have an event on their site for this year that I was testing for. Do not assume you don't want to assume that content exists, especially in Drupal. That's its bread and butter. We're always updating contents. We're always updating menus. If you write your test around assuming content exists, as soon as it changes, your test will fail. The feature didn't break, but the content updated. You will have to go back and update your test through every time anybody goes on the site and changes any content, just so you can maintain assurance that your testing suite is passed. As much as possible, assume complete statelessness on your site. Create content as you go through each time on the fly. That goes for users. The one thing you really can rely on is configuration, which I know Drupal 7 struggles with separating configuration from content as much, a la blocks and menu items. But as much as possible, try to rely on config being what it should be and what state it should be in. Create content on the fly to verify that your config is what you're expecting. Behat has this concept, and it's all just baked in. It wants to drive you towards that statelessness. Anything we create here, as soon as this testing scenario is done, it will automatically wipe and blow it away. So you're not leaving content lingering on the site. You're not flooding a local test copy or your staging server. It's going to reset the state back to what it was, so you can run your next test, not assuming that any of this content's there. So I wanted to kind of break down the magic barrier of what actually happens here. We can't just stick raw text. This is crazy. This is crazy talk. I just stick human readable text and it magically executes somehow. Wanted to break down what that looks like a little bit. So a lot of these come predefined, but this is ultimately what they all are. These are your step definitions. I define a scenario, I step through that scenario, and each step has to have an appropriate definition that PHP knows how to interpret, understand, and then actually do a thing on. So if I had a step definition, actually this is pulled from Drupal Extension, of given I'm an anonymous user, we're using annotation matching, which is just this fancy at given will match that it's a step definition, and then everything past here we'll use abstracted down regex to go this half matches that half, so obviously that step definition is supposed to execute this code. There is one kind of gotcha here. This isn't actually important when you're defining the step definitions. And step definitions, the big three, are given, when, then, given some context, when some action happens, or some condition changes, then some results. This will also match if I write a step definition with when or then. This is largely superfluous. It's more of just making your code a little bit more readable and making your tests a little bit more readable. If it made sense for me to say when I'm an anonymous user, that would automatically match up to the given annotation text. But I go down here, Drupal Extension has bootstrapped Drupal for me, so I have a lot of the Drupal code already bootstrapped. There's a lot of helper functions that come in this, so I don't have to check for a logout link. I can just do something. If there's a helper function for is logged in, we'll check to see if there's an active user session, and if it is, I will force the user to log out. This is saying I have an anonymous user. So I want to make sure that if there was any persistent session, blow it away, make sure we're an anonymous user. Actually, this is a small snippet. I think maybe, yeah. Live demo stuff. We can list our definitions, our step definitions that come defined. These are definitions that are defined by the Drupal extension, by Behat, and by anything you write yourself. And you can see there's a large quantity that just come right out of the box. A lot of these, your Behat definitions will be a lot of generic web behaviors. Things like I'm at a path or a visit a path. That's just a lot of kind of your generic walking through, working with any web property. And then there are some more Drupal definitions, like you can, on the fly, can create a new vocabulary term and give it a name. If you just want a term and name, you don't want to worry about any fields on your taxonomy terms. So what's helpful a lot is when you're writing tests to keep these in mind and leverage these as much as possible. Every time you'll leverage one of these predefined step definitions, it's code that you don't have to implement and write yourself. And a lot of times it works out that these step definitions get boiled together to make a really cohesive testing language. So, let's say I want to write my own step definition. Let's say the concept of the site, the client's going to constantly be running these migrations to ingest content, and it's, for whatever reason, the output is it needs to have Workbench installed. This is from a very unique hub and spoke migration project from a few years ago, but let's just walk through the process here of what this might actually look like. So in this test-driven, behavior-driven development concept, I would actually write this test first. This is exactly what I'd write. I wouldn't tag it with those other tags, but just as the editor of this project, I need to verify this module is enabled so we can set and configure custom settings as we're going through and migrating content. If you use PHP Storm, which I find is a widely popular tool, it will auto-detect a lot of your step definitions and give you the nice little autocomplete feature. I mention that because this is something I'm writing. This isn't something that's prepared. We're writing language for this, and it's detected that. It's letting me know that we don't think that that exists. So I would write this test. I would then come back and I would write the test first. I would run the test. The test would say, hey, that doesn't exist. The test would say, hey, that doesn't exist. We couldn't find anything for it, but it's really designed to help you out as much as possible. As soon as it finds something that you've written a new step definition that wasn't already predefined, it's going to spit you out some a little code snippet you can copy and paste that will define it for you. You can put this in. This throws a pending exception. This will allow your test suite to run, but will throw a warning at the end. Won't necessarily fail it, just letting you know that you have a step definition that you haven't defined yet. So I would then take this code, and in my file structure, I have this, I mentioned this at the very beginning, I have this feature context PHP, which is just where all of this magic code lives, that I'm extending, for all my step definitions live where I'm extending and writing my own custom steps. Going to uncomment that, and run the same test again. The code here, again, we have Drupal completely bootstrapped, so this is just a Drupal 7 test because I'm, for better or for worse, writing a lot of tests in Drupal 7 at the moment. We're going to hit the Drupal 7 global function just if the module exists, which for some reason, despite its name, checks to see if it's present and if it's installed in the registry. So this is actually checking to see if it's installed. If it is installed, return true, do nothing else, we're good. Returning true and getting through the step will return a positive result. If there's anything bad, we're going to throw an exception, which will fail the test and give a little bit of description, a little small description about why we failed it. Perfect. I wanted that. Test failed. I ran this test, and that's because I don't have this module enabled yet. Let me enable Workbench. Yes. The reason I intentionally failed it too, again, black on black, excellent choice. We wired this up to our CI process more often than not, and this is useful information for everybody on the team. It's not just a very technical exception thrown in the entity class or trying to access a property that doesn't exist. This will fail, and we intentionally will ping everybody. If it's failing on production, we'll ping everybody on the project. The project manager can take this and ascertain what's going on. The stakeholders can understand what's going on. Developers very quickly can see what's going on. In this case, it's not that difficult, so I'm going to enable this module. And now that I've fixed the problem, I would then rerun the test. And would, now we're passing. Now I can say this feature's done, this ticket's complete, here's the code that fixes it, here's the test that fixes it, push it up, ship it. If it ever changes, this test will fail in the future. Yes. We talked about this, writing more and more custom step definitions. These are just a few of the tools you can use that you can include with writing tests. This is kind of a raw code snippet of just your feature context as a good starting point. The raw Drupal context will give you everything Behat ships with, so you have the ability to, when writing tests, do things like set cookies, navigate to a different page, alter user sessions. You can do things even as granular as check and alter manipulate the HTTP header or what's in the body that you're shipping on the web request or getting back. And then you've got Drupal as well. You can manipulate users, you can create users, create content, and really dive in there. Let's see here. Okay, so this is just running through the public step definition that I wrote for checking for the workbench module. Something I can't hit on. This is much more convenient than having to write the previous regex for this. But if you ever wanted to write a step definition that you can pass an argument into, so I was checking for the workbench. I was checking for the workbench module specifically. You can put a colon in front of it and just parameterizes what it is you're trying to pass in. Pass it into the function, and you can use it as a parameter. It actually does name matching. We'll match up the module, or the parameter name there will match whatever you have the colon in front of in your step definition. It's not whatever order they show in first. I find that makes them a little bit more readable. But again, just test to make sure whatever state condition is true. If it's true, we'll return true. If it's false, we'll throw an exception back. Okay, well, my slide to do a little bit of a live demo died there. So when I was running this Behat test, this is actually running on a local version of our site. We're running this, we've migrated off of Vagrant and Drupal VM. We're running all this through Doxel, which is why I'm prefixing all my commands with Fin. That's not relevant to this talk, but definitely something worth looking into. So I've got my MindGrub Drupal 7 test here. And as walking through some of the examples we covered here, I've got a home page. I'm just going to make sure that my home page works there. This is just kind of an intro test. I also will give this to a lot of our developers as this is a good starting point of how to structure our test. This also verifies that our site's still there. Pantheon, well, we're hosting on Pantheon, so Pantheon's still up, and it was able to build successfully. I'm just going to make sure I can access the home page. One of our header messages is there, and I'm going to make sure that we have a user login page because a lot of our marketing team uses our site to publish blog posts and share our event calendar. Also talked about user login. These are not our actual passwords. We just reset these for testing locally. But again, I just want to make sure that our login mechanics are working. We have a little bit of custom logic around OAuth and IP whitelisting. I want to make sure that that's working and I can log in where appropriate. People can edit content. This is one of the first features that will get pulled off of project work to go fix our site is if one of our job postings are ever down. Plug, I guess, for hiring. But it's just another example of a test. I just am going to check our job listings page, and we seem to always be hiring for these 3 positions: JavaScript engineers, DevOps engineers, and web developer interns. I'm impressed at how many interns we hire all year long. And JavaScript's the new hotness. We're always hiring. This is kind of a fun thing to make your test more readable. We'll actually run through this 3 times. It's a little bit different than some of the other examples. Instead of just a scenario, I've got a scenario outline, followed by an examples table. What we're going to do is we're going to run through this entire test block up here for every row we have in this table. And every time we run through it, we're just going to replace career with the actual job text there. So let me pull this page up and make sure. This is our careers page, so we're going to be verifying we have a home page, we can log in, and that on this career page we actually have the main positions that HR will ping me about if they ever go away. So this is a very small example of something that we would run in our CI process. Every time there's a new pull request or just intermittently, we'll run this against our site on a staging server, and some of them will run against a live server, just to verify we're always in compliance. It helps us from having to allocate QA to go and do this manually. It's automated, so on our projects where we're doing twice a week releases, we're always verifying we're in compliance as much as possible. And it's great because it gives us this opportunity to share this information in a little bit more user-friendly way than the terminal, but it allows us to share this information with the client, which then gives us another deliverable to go, we're adding, this is the value we're adding. We're building out your site. We're always verifying that it's there, and maybe it's because I've been doing this so long. I personally am a big fan of the seeing everything in green and nothing being in red. So, let's see, what time is it? This is just a little bit of a cheat sheet, a little snippet of a cheat sheet. There's a link to more, just to kind of walk through some of the more complex interactions we can do. We walk through the page as if it is a DOM element. We can iterate through it. We can iterate through with selectors. Our selectors can be CSS or jQuery, which are much easier for developers to see and understand. I can say things like grab the fourth LI element out of this menu UL if I wanted to do something like that. If needed, you have XPath available to you. It's a very, very powerful and complex library for querying elements to the DOM. But I can do things like find all elements that match the selector. I can give it a context to find them underneath this element, or find all headers inside Drupal's body or content tag. Or I can just look at the entire HTML document. I can look for text. I can look for specific HTML, which is great for verifying or interacting with specific elements on the page. I find this is visible, and working with verifying that content's actually visible on the page and not hidden is becoming more and more useful to leverage as we decouple Drupal further and further. Of course, I've got clicks, press. I can interact with input elements. I can check boxes. I can uncheck them. I can select things from drop-downs. There's a link there to a cheat sheet that goes into that a little bit more in depth. Again, because those references change as the libraries update too. So that's it for me. In conclusion, tests are awesome. They're good for everyone. They're good for the client. They're good for you. They're good for development. Most importantly, they're the best for the client, the product. The one thing everybody agrees on needs to win. If you're interested, and again, I'll tweet these out, I've got some documentation to further discuss Behat documentation, next steps to take there if you're looking to implement. I've got a completely encapsulated Behat in a box. Actually, I've got 2 now. I've got one for a Vagrant build, and I've got one for using the Doxel environment with a set up standalone Drupal site, and that's my Twitter handle. I'll be tweeting these out. I'll also push them up on the Drupaldelphia website. So, with that, any questions? Yes?
So, you mentioned we can test production sites as well, right? Using the Behat.
Yes.
Configure the URL somewhere for pointing to the production.
How to configure the URLs for testing on production?
Yeah.
Recently, we've taken to splitting our test up into 2 different suites, which. Okay. We got a couple. When I was talking about this Drupal tag, this tells our tools to bootstrap different tools. This tells us it's a Drupal test. What we've done recently, because I don't have a content one, I want to avoid doing things like creating content on the production site. Also, we're not opening up any kind of pipeline to give any kind of remote access to execute this level of PHP. So what we've ended up doing is we will run all of these in the staging environment completely top to bottom. A lot of these tests require open execution to Drupal's Bootstrap and the database, and also will be writing and deleting entity content. Then we separate with a tag. We'll write things. I think right now our latest one is we do a smoke test. We've got a separate tag set up that we will specifically only run these tests on the production URL. You can manipulate and configure these tags in the behat.yaml file. You can configure it to, so these tests locally will use Selenium or Chrome headless and debug mode. These will configure to run in a headless Firefox and point it to our production URL. We're having to be a little vigilant about making sure we're not writing or doing anything that could potentially be destructive, and especially not doing things like this. We'll change the user credentials on our staging and our test environments to make testing easier, also to secure our data. But we're also not doing things like logging in with actual credentials on production either. Does that answer your question at all? Awesome. Yes.
You said they have 2 test suites, separated into 2 test suites.
Yes.
Is like one smoke and one more, and like how long do they take?
So that's a good question. Let's see if I actually. Yeah. So our smoke test and any test that require JavaScript are going to be extremely more time consuming. If you saw when I ran the test there, we had 2 seconds. That's awesome. That's because we're not actually loading a browser or anything. We're effectively just, for all of these tests, fetching the DOM element, not doing any kind of rendering. This is something that Behat comes with out of the box. Sorry, not Behat, Drupal Extension. There's a JavaScript tag you can put at the top of your test. This is necessary if you're doing things like testing things that are rendered to the page or testing JavaScript. We can't just fetch the DOM and arbitrarily execute JavaScript. We've got to bootstrap Selenium and or an entire browser. We've got to wait for paint time. This will add a lot of drag to your test suite. I think currently granted this project's been in production or been in active development for 5 years, our test suite top to bottom will take 45 minutes to run. Our smoke test is taking about 15 minutes to run because, again, you're introducing things like browser paint time, loading a browser, waiting for JavaScript to finish loading, and on production, you're also including legacy pingback time for the production server actually to deliver the payload back. We're always vigilant of trying to strike a balance and not getting in a situation where we're waiting 4 hours from feedback from our test suite to push up a new merge request. I think we're exploring isolating them further to help speed that down. Anything else?
Test the tests.
Test the test.
If you were to upgrade to Drupal 8, would you find it had the capability to do unit tests? Would you find yourself like targeting a unit test at certain things, like removing some of your Behat tests?
Yes.
Replacing them with unit tests?
That is absolutely true. Full disclosure.
Make the distinction.
Do what?
How would you make the distinction of what to make unit tests for, as opposed to what to? Would you continue using Behat?
Oh, I absolutely would. I mean, full disclosure. In Drupal 7, I abuse Behat mostly because we don't have a lot of great other options. Simple tests are painful and difficult to maintain long term. We still do write them where appropriate. I think in Drupal 8, we're able to isolate what we're building in a more granular level. There's times I've tried to implement features, trying to think of the last time I did. I think we were trying to isolate a component from the front end in Drupal 8 that came from the form API, and we built a queue runner to push it off to a third-party service, process it, wait for it back. It's almost impossible to pick that one unit out of Drupal. That's something where we really just want to test to make sure that our queue runner is working, but in Drupal 7, we've got this infinite list of dependencies that we basically just bootstrap all of Drupal. In Drupal 8, if it's something that is isolatable and I'm just testing really a fundamental component, I would definitely lean more towards unit testing.
So the more end-to-end dependencies like that case, then you maybe stick with Behat, so you could just test the whole, that it works from the beginning to the end.
Right.
Including all the things in between.
Yeah, especially if I'm building something if I'm focusing a lot of effort on something that delivers some kind of behavioral component of the software to the user, I definitely would look at Behat. If I'm doing something like replacing a backend queue, like replacing the queue API or batch API and queue API, it's not something the user ever interacts with. I would probably lean more on phpunit or some amalgamation of. Awesome. Anybody else? Everyone's going to go home and add some tests to their software? Yes. Cool. Thanks, guys.